there are real social and economic, fallouts from these lockdown measures. We had yesterday Fed Chair Powell speak virtually to us here at the Peterson Institute. And one of the tidbits or statistics that he gave us from a new Fed survey was that 40% of all households under earning less than $40,000 in the United States, which is roughly about a third of the total population, they have now lost their main source of household income. 40%. That tells you something about the magnitude of the job losses and the negative social impact that they have. There was another survey done a few weeks ago, or actually 2 weeks ago, by the Hamilton Project, which interviewed people about their finances and food security. And this survey told you that approximately a quarter of American households felt that they had too little money to purchase the food that they would like to purchase. And fully almost 20% of households with children under the age of 12 actually reported in this survey that their children had too little food to eat because they didn't have enough money in the household. So it's really important to recognize that when there is a widespread urge to reopen the American economy, it has to do with the far-reaching, much deeper social negative effects of the lockdown compared to what you have seen in every European country, or certainly virtually every European country. There is real human costs associated with keeping this lockdown in place. We are dependent on Congress to continue to appropriate all this money. And if you're looking at the political debate in Washington right now, this is clearly not as easy as it was earlier in the pandemic, where you already now have a number of Republican senators saying that now is not the time to spend more money. And I'm happy to say that when Jay Powell spoke to us yesterday, he very forcefully countered that sentiment and made it very explicit that in the views of the Federal Reserve, unless there is continuing fiscal expenditure at a very high level in the United States, you risk engineering a more lasting scarring of the labor market, hysteresis, and those kinds of longer-term effects. So in this scenario, how is middle and upper middle class Americans going to respond? Well, my view is that they have a very strong incentive to increase their precautionary savings rate because there is no guarantee that if the pandemic continues, or if we even have a large secondary wave, that Congress will be as forthcoming as quickly as it was initially in the pandemic. And therefore that even more people may run the risk of being suddenly without income. And obviously, if you have a very significant increase in the personal savings rate, and I think we have seen early indications of that, well, then we're not going to have, irrespective of the effect on the pandemic, you're not going to have a V-shaped recovery in the United States. You're going to have something that is far shallower than that. And that actually is, in my opinion, the main risk associated with the pandemic at this point in time.
Let's focus on Trump's re-election chances or not. I mean, I remember that you back in 2016 also kind of disregarded or downtoned Trump's re-election chances.
As everybody else, I guess.
As everybody else, honestly, including ourselves. But isn't there a chance that he can surprise again? I mean, that he is such a strong campaigner. And also with Biden, you know, I remember when we met in October, I wouldn't say you called him Sleepy Joe, but it was quite close in the sense that you didn't see him as very energetic and so forth. Isn't there a chance that Trump will roll him over when they get to the debates and, you know, he will get the momentum vis-a-vis the electorate? And what are sort of the chances that Trump can cling to apart from the economy?
No, look, full disclosure, I was obviously one of those people who thought that Donald Trump had no chance to be reelected and to be elected in 2016. So, my crystal ball on these matters is not exactly perfect. But I will say that one of the things we have seen since the election of Donald Trump is a very significant increase in enthusiasm on the Democratic side, because they basically truly and viscerally hate Donald Trump. Now, that has a lot of other negative effects for the long-term political coherence of the United States, but it means that the likelihood that we're going to have a repeat of the scenario that we saw in 2016, where basically remember that it was much more Hillary Clinton that lost that election rather than Donald Trump winning it, because she got a lot fewer votes than Obama did in 2012, and therefore she lost these crucial swing states in the Midwest, etc. The prospect of that happening again is in my opinion very, very limited, because fundamentally you can fool me once, but not twice. So people aren't going to make that mistake again, in my opinion. The other one is of course basic economics. If you had asked me just a few months ago, look, I thought the economy was doing very well. Unemployment was at a 50-year low. And Trump clearly had a good case to make in some ways, that finally the economy was working also for low-income Americans, because they were starting to see wage increases. So he could have had a chance to appeal beyond his traditional white, blue-collar base. That, however, today is gone. He doesn't have that opportunity anymore, because though this is precisely the groups for whom every job, the job destruction has been concentrated, and they are, as I referred earlier, really struggling these days. So they are very unlikely, in my opinion, to be appealed to by Donald Trump's economic pitch. And then, he does have the problem with older voters, as I mentioned. They're clearly the one bearing the most of the brunt of the pandemic, and they will be most at risk from an early reopening strategy. And surprise, surprise, they're not necessarily liking that. So I'm therefore, in my opinion, somewhat skeptical that Trump has a real platform from where he can gain re-election. But that's why, as I said, I give him 20%. He pulled off a miracle in 2016. That may happen again, but it is still, in light of the pandemic, in my opinion, very, very far from being an open election. I don't think it is. It is Joe Biden's election to lose.
Even if you open up, people will not come out on the streets. They will be careful. Is that what you are seeing? What are you thinking? Also sitting in Washington, which of course has been heavily infected.
Very large share of low-income Americans, they have lost their sources of income, and they probably have no choice other than to go back to work. Even if that work may entail very significant increased risk of infection. We have seen that, and one of the reasons why, for instance, Iowa is now a major rising source of infections is the fact that a lot of people there have been infected because they work close together in meat processing plants, which of course is not work you can do from home. So I think what you're going to see is that people that have the capacity, like people like me or other white collar workers that to a large extent can work from home, are going to keep doing that, while people who cannot are going to try to come back and live, earn a normal wage. But it's going to be very difficult because obviously, while people like me are staying at home, my consumption patterns are dramatically different. And therefore, the longer-term, medium-term prospects for this rapid recovery, as long as the pandemic is not more under control, I think are very, very negative. I don't see the prospects of people that have a choice exposing themselves to the pandemic simply because they feel that it's sort of, that they believe in freedom and it's the American way and all these other slogans that we hear from President Trump. I just don't see it. And that's why I'm mostly concerned about that lack of return to normal by the American consumer as part of this premature or early reopening strategy.